Hey guys, today I'll show you a science fiction thriller TV series named Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. This is definitely the most bizarre case you've ever seen. In a luxury hotel suite, 3 people are found dead in gruesome fashion, as if they had been torn apart by a massive creature. The scene is riddled with bullet holes from surreal weaponry, and neither the FBI nor the military can figure out the truth. The only one capable of cracking this mystery is an all-powerful detective with supernatural abilities. The drama begins on a peaceful and serene morning when a gruesome scene unfolds in the penthouse of a certain hotel, showing that several men lie dead like pieces of soap, their bodies mangled. The only survivor is a lone black cat. Meanwhile, across the city, Todd, an aging loser, is rudely awakened by a loud noise outside his apartment. It turns out his fluffy landlord is furiously smashing his car because Todd has failed to pay his rent. Left with no choice, Todd promises to pay up by the end of the day. He then hurriedly gets dressed and heads to work. The TV in the background reports the disappearance of a young girl from a wealthy family named Lydia, but Todd's attention shifts to a lost corgi wandering by. In this city, both people and animals tend to go missing. Arriving at the hotel, Todd changes into his server uniform and begins another grueling workday. He first approaches the manager, hoping to get an advance on his paycheck to cover his rent, but is flatly rejected. Instead, the manager sends him to clean a room on the top floor. With no other option, Todd heads up. As the elevator stops on the 18th floor, something bizarre happens. Todd comes face to face with another version of himself, wearing a leather coat. The two lock eyes for a second before the leather-clad Todd bolts like a fat bird, leaving the real Todd in utter confusion. When the elevator reaches the top floor, Todd stumbles upon a lottery ticket on the ground and picks it up absent-mindedly. But when he opens the room door, he gets his second shock of the day. It isn't long before the police swarm the hotel. Among the 3 victims in the room is Patrick, a billionaire and the father of the missing Lydia, so the 2 police officers assigned to her case show up to investigate. The room, covered in bite marks, leaves them completely baffled, not knowing whether it's done by humans or animals. Due to the damaged security footage, the only thing the police can confirm is that 2 minutes before Todd arrived, someone wearing a gorilla mask used Todd's key card to enter the room. After questioning Todd, they realize they lack evidence to arrest him, but they do warn him not to leave the city. Things go from bad to worse when Todd's manager, who had been listening in, immediately fires him for being a suspect. Just like that, Todd loses his job for reasons he can't comprehend. When Todd finally gets home, he finds a stranger climbing through his window. The 2 wrestle with their chicken muscles and exchange blows rather than hormones until they're both exhausted, and the man finally introduces himself. His name is Dirk, a self-claimed detective, and he wants Todd to become his assistant. Without hesitation, Dirk attempts to settle in at Todd's place, intending to enjoy free housing, but Todd, fed up, kicks his smelly butt out. Meanwhile, across the way, a colonel and his soldiers are surveilling Todd's home. One of the soldiers misinterprets a command and takes a sniper shot at Todd. The bullet misses Todd's bulletproof muscles, but ricochets through the building, accidentally hitting a bald man upstairs, possibly due to his shining bald head. This, in turn, frees a hairy woman who had been held captive by the bald man for his evil desires. Enraged, the colonel has no choice but to drive off, his cover blown. Coincidentally, the 2 police officers had also been staking out the area and, upon seeing the military presence, become even more convinced that Todd is involved in something sinister. The next day, Todd planned to visit his sister, but when he stepped outside, he found Dirk already waiting for him at the door, insisting on tagging along. Todd, feeling exasperated, had no choice but to let him. At that moment, the landlord showed up again, demanding the overdue rent. Left with no options, Todd reluctantly got into Dirk's car. Dirk sped recklessly down the road, introducing himself as an all-powerful detective who used to work for the CIA. He rambled on about his crime-solving theories, claiming that as long as you grasp the big picture, you can uncover the truth because everything in the world is interconnected. Todd, however, wasn't interested in Dirk's babbling. The next day, when they arrived at Todd's sister's place, Dirk acted as if he were at home and walked right in without a second thought. After some small talk, Dirk learned that Todd's sister suffered from a strange condition called inverse perception syndrome. She frequently experienced bizarre hallucinations, which could only be alleviated by medication. For her safety, she had to stay home, and Todd visited regularly to care for her. After a while, Todd and his sister started playing music together, but she suddenly had an episode, mistaking her drumsticks for a weapon. It took quite some time for her to calm down. On the way back, Todd explained the syndrome further. It turns out it's a genetic condition in their family. Their parents had spent all their savings on Todd's treatment, leaving him with the responsibility of taking care of his sister. Back home, Dirk finally revealed that he wanted Todd's help investigating Patrick's death. A few weeks earlier, Patrick had hired Dirk to look into his death, and now, for some reason, Dirk was determined to get Todd involved. Just as they were talking, a group of uninvited guests barged in. Some punk maniacs started smashing things and robbing the place. Todd realized they were after Dirk and tried to throw him out, but by then, the punk gang had already reached the door. Being soft-hearted, Todd pulled Dirk back inside, but it was no use. The punks violently broke down the door and started trashing everything. A short while later, they surrounded Dirk and began absorbing some sort of energy from him. Once they were done, they left as suddenly as they had arrived. Todd stood in his wrecked apartment, unsure of what to do next. As if things couldn't get worse, his furious landlord stormed in, pulled out a gun, and accidentally shot himself to hell. Hearing the gunshot, the colonel and his soldiers rushed in, only to run into the police and the FBI, leading to a tense standoff between the three parties. Todd once again was taken to the police station, and once again, without any evidence, he was released, though the police warned him not to leave the city. Feeling down, Todd left the station and bumped into Dirk, who had also just been released. Dirk speculated that the CIA had intervened to protect them and continued trying to convince Todd to become his assistant since he's psychic enough. However, Todd flatly refused, believing that he's pretty normal. On his way home, Todd saw the stray corgi again. This time, moved by compassion, he decided to return the corgi to its owner. Following the address on the dog's collar, Todd arrived at the house of the dog owner, Gordon, intending to return the dog, but he was shocked to find Lydia, the missing girl, there as well. Having already gone through so much in one day, Todd didn't want to get involved any further. Just then, he caught a glimpse of the lottery results on TV and was astonished to discover that the ticket he had picked up earlier had won him a $10,000 prize. The scene shifts to a keyboard warrior furiously typing away on his keyboard to deliver tons of negative comments to Daniel CC Movie Channel, while a bald man who hired him for the mission impatiently nags him from nearby. Suddenly, a beat-up car screeches to a stop and a woman jumps out, wielding a machete and launching a relentless attack on the bald man. She then charges at the keyboard warrior, who bolts in fear without bringing his furious keyboard along. After a long chase, the hit woman begins to tire, shouting that she's after Dirk. The keyboard warrior, utterly confused, quickly clarifies that he's not Dirk. With the misunderstanding cleared up, the hit woman forcefully drags him along. As they drive, the hit woman casually slaughters anyone in their path, sending the keyboard warrior into a panic. She calmly explains that she's an all-powerful assassin and that everyone she kills deserves it. She also shares Dirk's theory that everything in the world is connected. Soon after, the car breaks down. The hit woman, unfazed, demonstrates another of her abilities, extreme luck. Sure enough, a man appears shortly after and offers to help fix the car and possibly fix her body. However, his intentions aren't pure. He's planning to rob them. Miraculously, when he fires multiple shots at the hit woman, every bullet misses, and he ends up being killed instead without bulletproof muscles. The keyboard warrior, stunned, watches in disbelief. To further prove her powers, the hit woman shoots at her own sexy body, but the gun jams every time she aims in her direction, while it fires perfectly when aimed elsewhere. This convinces him of her extraordinary abilities. Meanwhile, the police are investigating the strange case. Lydia had been missing for less than a week before her father Patrick was found brutally murdered in the hotel. The Patrick family's bodyguard also disappeared on the day of the incident. Additionally, the security footage showed a corgi escaping the hotel that day, and it turns out the bodyguard is the woman who had been held captive by the bald man as shown at the beginning of the scene. 2 days earlier, the bodyguard received a distress call from Lydia and rushed to the location, which turned out to be Todd's apartment building. Soon after arriving, she was ambushed by several bald men. After taking one down, she sought help from the residents and ended up knocking on Todd's door. However, Todd, being too scared, didn't let her in, and she was then captured by the bald men. After the stray bullet killed one of the captors, the bodyguard broke free, but accidentally knocked herself out in the process. When she regained consciousness, she was surrounded by the group of bald men who began questioning her about the black cat and why there were two Patricks. Confused, the bodyguard couldn't answer, so the bald men began torturing her with electric shocks without hormone mercy. They eventually dragged her heavy body away, unaware they were being watched by the FBI. The scene shifts back to the present where Todd's sister, after taking her medication, was about to head out when she noticed she was being watched by the punk gang from earlier. Sensing trouble, she thought about asking Todd for help, but decided instead to step outside and throw a brick at them as a warning. Unfortunately, she suddenly had an episode and had to rush back inside for more medication. By the time she had recovered, the punk gang had tossed the brick back with a friendly greeting. Amused, she grabbed her drums and started playing, joining the punk gang in an impromptu jam session, sparking an unlikely friendship. At this moment, Todd and Dirk were hiding outside Gordon's house, lying in wait. Dirk had somehow gotten wind of a wild story which said that Patrick had been killed by a shark in the hotel. Todd was stunned and was about to ask more when the dog's owner, Gordon, a notorious cult member, returned in his car. Seeing this, Dirk dragged Todd into the garage. There, they unexpectedly discovered that Gordon seemed to be a die-hard fan of a certain rock star. While Gordon was busy making a phone call, the two started eavesdropping. By chance, they also spotted the kidnapped Lydia, confirming her presence. They quickly began brainstorming an escape plan. In the midst of their maneuvering, they accidentally knocked over a candle. Todd tried to open the bathroom window, but the noise was too loud, drawing Gordon's attention. In a panic, Todd made a break for it, while Dirk, now discovered, scattered a bunch of business cards to distract Gordon. Just then, Gordon noticed the fire and, in the commotion, Dirk seized the opportunity to flee with the corgi. After narrowly escaping, Todd ran into Dirk again, and the two quickly got into a heated argument, disagreeing on what to do next. Following their spat, Gordon, having pieced together Dirk's identity from the business cards, sent him a message proposing a trade, the corgi for the hostage. That night, both parties met at the arranged location. Gordon brought the hostage, but it turned out to be the bodyguard, not Lydia. He then demanded both the black cat and the corgi dog from Dirk. Todd, growing impatient, told Gordon to hand over Lydia. The two sides were talking past each other, frustrating Todd, who threatened to throw the corgi into the river if Gordon didn't release the hostage. Out of nowhere, a human face suddenly appeared on the corgi's face, terrifying Todd so much that he let go of the dog. Seizing the moment, the hidden bald-headed archer took action. Two FBI agents, hearing the commotion, also sprang into action, firing shots. A fast and furious shootout ensued, and Todd and Dirk rushed to escape with the bodyguard. Before long, one FBI agent was dead, and the other was wounded. Watching the surviving FBI agent, Gordon hatched a daring plan. After successfully rescuing the bodyguard, Todd and Dirk started arguing again. It was then that Todd noticed Dirk had brought the black cat with him. To his surprise, it also seemed that the bodyguard already knew Dirk. What neither Todd nor Dirk realized was that Dirk's troubles were just beginning. Due to the botched operation, the colonel had no choice but to report to his superior. His orders were clear: eliminate everyone involved in the Blackwing project, and their first target is Dirk. Reluctantly, the colonel agreed. The colonel quickly gathered his soldiers and began explaining the Blackwing project. In 1988, under CIA orders, the colonel established the Blackwing Division, tasked with tracking down individuals with supernatural abilities worldwide, studying and dealing with them. Both Dirk and the hitwoman were part of this group, but now they were ordered to eliminate their own. Meanwhile, Todd and his group returned to Gordon's house, only to find it burned to the ground with no useful clues. The bodyguard decided to test Gordon by giving him a call. Once again, both sides thought the other had taken Lydia, resulting in another fruitless exchange. They then agreed to split up. Dirk accompanied the bodyguard back to the Patrick family estate, while Todd went to the police. On the way, the bodyguard shared the history of the Patrick family. The Patrick family home was originally the residence of a 19th century scientist, only bought by Patrick in the 1990s. As they arrived, the butler greeted them and handed over a letter from Patrick. He had specifically instructed the butler to only give the letter to the bodyguard if both she and Dirk were present. A quick glance at the envelope told Dirk that Patrick had left them with 3 questions and 1 answer. Inside the letter was a map of the Patrick family estate. Following its directions, they wandered around the house until they reached a blank wall. After a moment of thought, the bodyguard smashed through the wall, revealing a hidden door. Behind it was the scientist's old laboratory. Dirk picked up a mysterious light bulb that glowed on its own without electricity. Then he noticed a note that read, "It starts here and ends here." The note urges them to save her, which might refer to Lydia. Dirk suddenly realized that everything they'd been through was part of Patrick's plan. Meanwhile, the hit woman and the keyboard warrior were driving along, singing, when they were suddenly ambushed by a biker gang. After a long time, the keyboard warrior realized they'd been tied up and was scared out of his wits, in fear that they might take advantage of his handsome muscles. The hit woman, however, remained calm, knowing she was immortal. When the gang returned, intending to kill them and steal their belongings, the leader tossed a ball in mockery. Through a series of coincidences, the ball actually untied the lucky hit woman. In no time, she had surrounded the entire gang, taking them all down single-handedly. With the biker gang wiped out, the hit woman told the keyboard warrior it was time to continue their hunt for Dirk. Cut to another scene where the little corgi wandered into the police station, further fueling the officer's suspicions about the case. Todd also arrived at the station, telling the police about his encounter with Lydia. Instead of taking him seriously, the police brought up his past, accusing him of stealing and selling his band's instruments, as if everything he had ever done wrong now made him a prime suspect. As this interrogation unfolded, Todd suddenly received a call from his sick sister. It turned out that earlier, Todd's sister had gathered the courage to step outside and explore the world, only to be followed by the punk gang for reasons unknown. Unfortunately, while shopping at a supermarket, she had another hallucination and, in her panic, spilled her medication everywhere. In desperation, she called Todd for help. Todd hung up and immediately rushed out, but by then, her hallucinations had grown more severe. Confused passers-by thought she was crazy, and no one bothered to call for help. Luckily, the punk gang arrived just in time, surrounding Todd's sister and absorbing her supernatural energy, but sparing her sexy body. When she regained consciousness, she found herself safe and sound back at home. When Todd arrived, he found his sister acting as if nothing had happened, and she herself was baffled by the situation. For safety, Todd decided to bring her back to his place. To his surprise, Dirk and the bodyguard were already there, and they had brought another map. Todd's sister immediately recognized it as an electrical grid map and helped pinpoint their apartment's location on it. Dirk then planned to go downstairs to retrieve the eternal light bulb, but the colonel had already arrived. The soldiers quickly moved in to restrain Dirk, but instead of acting, they simply informed him that the government was reopening its investigation into the Blackwing project's superhumans. Dirk, however, was indifferent, insisting on solving the current case first. Left with no choice, the colonel allowed him to leave. The next day, Todd didn't want to leave his sister and get further involved, but Dirk and the bodyguard kept pressuring him to join them. With some encouragement from his sister, Todd finally decided to help them crack the case. It was rumored that Patrick had an infinite energy device, which had been the foundation of the family's energy company fortune. Now, the trio aimed to find this device. The map showed it was hidden in an unremarkable little shack. After circling the shack for a while without figuring out how to enter, Dirk accidentally triggered a mechanism and fell through a trap door. Confused, Todd also turned the mechanism and followed him down. Meanwhile, the FBI agent who had been captured the night before was taken to Gordon's secret base. A bizarre device swapped the souls of a bald henchman and a rat. Then, they used the same device to switch the FBI agent's soul with the rat's. In this way, the bald henchman took over the FBI agent's body, not bald anymore, while the agent, now in the rat's body, was disposed of. Afterward, the fake FBI agent then went to the police, discussed the case, and learned Todd's home address. The police found something odd about him and, being cautious, withheld the information that they had found the corgi. The fake FBI agent quickly headed to Todd's house, where only Todd's sister was home. Seeing the agent, she truthfully told him that her brother wasn't home, but he didn't leave and instead waited outside. Feeling uneasy, Todd's sister called for help. The bodyguard, realizing this behavior violated FBI protocol, decided to go back and check on the situation. Soon after, the fake FBI agent lost patience and forced his way inside. Todd's sister was terrified by his strange demeanor. Just then, the bodyguard arrived and pulled the fake FBI agent aside for a private conversation, pointing out his unprofessional conduct. To her surprise, the fake FBI agent seemed to know everything about her, and his barrage of sharp remarks left the bodyguard speechless. Riding the wave, he handed her a business card, saying she should call him if she got any leads. At this moment, Dirk and Todd were stumbling around in the dark, searching for a way out, but finding nothing. Suddenly, the lights flickered on, and the walls on either side began to close in, compressing the room. Panic set in as they struggled to figure out what to do. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, Todd remembered the eternal light bulb in Dirk's hand. He spotted a socket on the wall, realizing that the bulb must be the key to the mechanism. As Todd twisted the bulb, they narrowly escaped just in time before the walls fully closed in on them. They soon found themselves in another room, but this time the door was locked, and they were left staring at a carving of a rhinoceros on the door. Dirk, confident he had solved the problem, pressed a switch and reached for the door, only to be shocked into paralysis by the trap. Both of them were now truly stumped. Fortunately, Todd noticed the rhinoceros carving was missing its horn, and there was a horn on the table. Suddenly, it all clicked for him. He and Dirk joined hands, using their bodies to conduct electricity between the rhinoceros and the horn. As they completed the circuit, the door swung open. However, the escape wasn't over yet. Another room awaited them. This time, a screen displayed a series of matching puzzle symbols, like a game of memory. After a brief moment of thought, Dirk clicked on a sequence: a cat, a shark, a dog, and a girl, followed by a 3-in-1 combination, solving the puzzle instantly. A map flashed on the screen, but before they could study it, the system malfunctioned. Sparks flew, and they were once again plunged into danger. Back at the house, the bodyguard and Todd's sister smelled smoke. They rushed downstairs to investigate and heard Todd and Dirk calling for help from the basement. In a panic, the bodyguard fired several shots, attempting to break through the wall. Hearing the commotion, the punk gang, who had been keeping their peeping eyes on Todd's sexy sister, rushed to help, smashing through the wall and finally rescuing Todd and Dirk from their perilous situation. The scene shifts to the cult member Gordon, who tracked down the widow of the rock star after much effort. Seeing that she was still grieving her late husband, he decided to reveal the truth. The two made their way to the cult's base. As the widow saw her husband's belongings again, memories overwhelmed her, and she broke down in crocodile tears. It was then that Gordon slowly unveiled the truth. In the 1960s, a strange machine suddenly appeared before him, seemingly from another time. He discovered that this machine could swap the souls of living beings. With this knowledge, he and a partner founded the machine cult, kidnapping the rich and seizing their wealth and status. The so-called rock star had actually long ceased to exist. He was just one of the many bodies Gordon had used. Later, his partner betrayed him, trapping Gordon permanently in his current body. It was Gordon who had written to Lydia, claiming to know the truth about her mother's accidental death, using that to lure and kidnap her while she was still naive. Now, Gordon was determined to seize the infinite energy device held by Patrick. Once the two machines were combined, his machine cult would conquer the world. To prove he had shed his past as a vain rock star and assert his authority, Gordon, in front of all his underlings, brutally killed his former wife with his own hands. Over breakfast, Todd and Dirk discussed the case. Todd couldn't shake the feeling that Dirk had some sort of prophetic superpower, but Dirk flatly denied it and walked away from the table. Todd hurried to follow him, but accidentally bumped into a waiter, spilling food on his clothes. When Todd stepped outside, Dirk had already guessed what happened and had bought him a new shirt, which oddly felt familiar to Todd. Following the map, the two headed to a remote area and started digging at the designated spot. They spent the entire day working until they finally unearthed a small box containing a machine part. The next day, they tirelessly continued along the route, collecting more parts. After much effort, they finally assembled all the pieces. Just as they were putting the machine together, the assassins from the machine cult appeared and attacked. At that critical moment, the black cat Dirk had found sprang into action. To their astonishment, the soul of a shark emerged from the cat, instantly killing the machine cult assassin before returning to the cat's body. It suddenly dawned on them that the black cat was the real culprit behind the hotel murders. After narrowly surviving this life-threatening ordeal, Todd revealed a shocking truth. He had never actually suffered from inverse perception syndrome. Years ago, he had lied about it to get money from his parents for medical treatment. When his sister developed the condition, he had to claim he had been cured to give her the funds instead. Dirk listened in silence for a long time. Just then, Todd noticed the black cat had disappeared, and the two frantically started searching for it. During their search, Dirk opened up, admitting that he had always felt painfully lonely and had genuinely wanted to be Todd's friend. Encouraged by this, Todd decided it was time to tell his sister the truth. Meanwhile, the colonel was briefing his soldiers about the Punk Gang, a group of psychic vampires who are the subjects of the Blackwing project, and most importantly, could absorb human emotional energy. After letting Dirk go, the colonel planned to deal with the Punk Gang next. At the same time, Todd's sister noticed the Punk Gang's car parked outside and, unable to contain her curiosity, approached them. The Punk Gang welcomed her and explained that they fed on negative human emotions, which was why they had been following her, but they meant no harm. The gang then took her on a wild, punk-style rampage, smashing up a police car on the street. For once, Todd's sister was able to let loose and enjoy herself, though she had another episode during the chaos. Fortunately, the punk gang absorbed her feelings of guilt and self-doubt, ensuring that she wouldn't be in danger again. The next day, Todd's sister suddenly appeared on the colonel and his soldiers' radar. As they wondered where the others were, the punk gang ambushed and beat them up. It turned out Todd's sister had been used as bait. In desperation, one of the soldiers took her hostage, and even the colonel couldn't convince him to let her go. Faced with this, the punk gang had no choice but to retreat, but not before Todd's sister bit the soldier's smelly part and broke free. The colonel realized that the failure of this mission would only lead to stricter government oversight. Sure enough, government officials soon questioned the soldiers about the operation. When asked how he would handle the situation, the soldier insisted that if he were in charge, he'd take a much tougher stance against superhumans. His response seemed to satisfy the officials. Meanwhile, the two officers tracked down the zoo where Gordon used to work. From the zookeeper, they learned that Gordon might be hiding out in an abandoned animal transfer facility. They reported this to their superior, requesting an investigation into Gordon, but their request was denied. Frustrated, the two officers decided to go in on their own, with the bodyguard secretly tailing them. They soon infiltrated Gordon's base and were horrified to discover 35 corpses. Rushing outside to call for backup, they fell into a trap. One of the officers was shot by an arrow, and the following bodyguard confirmed that Lydia was indeed in Gordon's custody. Seeing that the enemy of their enemy could be an ally, the bodyguard shot one of the machine cult members, helping the remaining officer escape. However, the older officer succumbed to his injuries and died to meet Jesus. Devastated by his partner's death, the surviving officer confronted his superior again, demanding they investigate Gordon. Instead, the superior reprimanded him for disobeying orders and conducting an unauthorized investigation. The officer began to suspect that his superior was colluding with Gordon, a suspicion confirmed when he ordered his suspension and removal. Shortly afterward, the superior called Gordon, informing him of a change in plans. With no other options, the officer drowned his sorrows in alcohol. Piecing together earlier clues, he started to wonder if the corgi could be Lydia. To his astonishment, after several tests, he confirmed that the corgi was indeed Lydia, and Todd had taken her from Gordon's grasp. At this point, Todd and Dirk decided to split up. Dirk and the bodyguard would head to the Patrick family estate, while Todd would confess the truth to his sister and then meet up with them. Todd found the bodyguard, and they exchanged information rather than kisses. She agreed to the plan and before leaving handed Todd a pair of brass knuckles for self-defense. The moment of truth had finally arrived. Summoning all his courage, Todd confessed everything to his sister. He admitted that his claim of being sick in the past was a lie to get money from their parents. It wasn't until his sister fell ill that he realized how immature his actions had been. After apologizing, Todd presented the winning lottery ticket, hoping to use the prize money to make up for his past mistakes. For Todd's sister, recovering like her brother had been her greatest hope, only to learn that it was all based on a lie. Unable to accept this reality, she stormed into the bathroom sulking. She began recalling all the moments she had spent with her supposedly sick brother, supporting him through his illness, never imagining he could deceive her like this. After much thought, she demanded to call their parents. Todd reluctantly handed her his phone, only to discover that Dirk had already called 23 times. Just then, the officer arrived, believing Todd was working with the machine cult. He angrily demanded that Todd confess to his crimes. Before Todd could respond, his sister suddenly had an episode. Desperate, Todd pleaded with the officer to help his sister first. The officer hesitated for a moment before opening the bathroom door. Together, they carried Todd's sister out, just as two members of the machine cult arrived. The officer quickly escorted the corgi to safety, while the punk gang swooped in to battle the attackers. The punk gang, being far stronger, swiftly took down the two machine cult members and once again healed Todd's sister. When Todd's sister regained consciousness, she no longer wanted to live with her brother. She decided to travel the world with the punk gang. Todd could only watch helplessly as she walked away, and in a moment of distraction, he was electrocuted by one of the machine cult members who had just regained consciousness. Meanwhile, Dirk and the bodyguard were chatting about Dirk's dream of starting his own detective agency. As the conversation grew more animated, Dirk couldn't help but shout his name in excitement, which, unfortunately, caught the attention of the hit woman who was lurking nearby. The scene shifts back to a few days earlier when the keyboard warrior and the lucky hit woman who had made their way to Seattle. The hit woman decided to follow fate's path and wait for Dirk to appear, while the keyboard warrior helped her settle in. Restless and itching for action, the hitwoman decided to cause some chaos. After casually saying hello to a stranger, she inadvertently caused the man to die in a car accident. Shortly after, this deadly woman encountered her target, Dirk, who immediately fled in terror. The hitwoman pursued him relentlessly, but to her surprise, her luck seemed to have run out. No matter what, she couldn't hit her target. Meanwhile, the bodyguard, chasing after them, was ambushed by the keyboard warrior, but she quickly recovered and beat him up. In the midst of the chaos, the hitwoman finally caught Dirk. At the critical moment, both Dirk and the hitwoman simultaneously uttered the mantra that everything is connected. They both realized they were allies in the Blackwing project. Before they could talk further, the bodyguard intervened, swiftly taking down the hitwoman and whisking Dirk away. Back in the car, Dirk told the bodyguard that their plan was to take the assembled machine to the Patrick family estate. To be safe, the bodyguard called the fake FBI agent for backup. Meanwhile, the hitwoman, now in the keyboard warrior's care, was spiraling. She, who had never been injured before, was now no longer favored by fate, and it shattered her. As the keyboard warrior tried to console her using his muscles, he suddenly saw a news report saying that the man the hitwoman had accidentally killed was actually a heinous criminal. This, combined with the fact that the hitwoman had openly fired shots without being pursued, convinced the keyboard warrior that everything was in fact destined. He vowed to help the hitwoman complete their mission to kill Dirk. While waiting, Dirk and the bodyguard began examining the machine and noticed that the numbers on it resembled dates. At that moment, the fake FBI agent arrived and the two explained everything to him, only to realize they had walked straight into a trap. Soon, they were all captured by the machine cult and taken to a secret base. Dirk once again saw the device in Gordon's hideout and suddenly understood everything. Just then, a noise came from outside, prompting Gordon to send his men to check it out. Taking advantage of the distraction, Todd, now equipped with the brass knuckles, engaged in a brawl with Gordon, even ripping off part of his clothes in the struggle. Seizing an opportunity to escape, they ran into a room and locked the door behind them. Dirk fiddled with the mysterious device inside the room and then pressed a switch. To their astonishment, both Todd and Dirk disappeared into thin air right in front of their captors. The next second, they found themselves transported back to 1 week earlier. It turns out the machine they had assembled was a time machine. Hearing noise outside, they quickly hid and witnessed Gordon using the soul-swapping device to switch Lydia's soul with the corgis. Just as Gordon was about to leave, the machine cult leader arrived with his crew, accusing Gordon of betraying their cult. In response, Gordon grabbed Lydia as a hostage, but the leader saw through the ruse, recognizing that the corgi was the real Lydia. With no other choice, Gordon threatened to destroy the soul-swapping machine and quickly escaped with his allies, narrowly avoiding disaster. Just then, a steel-clad Iron Man appeared to flex his iron body, launching into a brutal killing spree. The machine cult stood no chance, and the room was soon littered with bodies. The Iron Man moved into the room, swiftly killing the leader, and then spotted Todd and Dirk hiding in the corner. Terrified, Todd panicked, but Dirk, remaining calm, called the Iron Man by name. It turned out to be Patrick, and the truth was finally revealed. Back in 1886, Patrick, then a scientist, had been trying to build a time machine. His early attempts had issues since the machine could only transfer energy, not physical bodies. After numerous failures, Patrick accidentally sent the machine into the future. When it returned, he found it had been modified, with a note signed by Dirk attached. Realizing his success, he used the machine to travel to 1968. But when he arrived, he found his home taken over by a group of hippies who refused to return the machine. Outnumbered, Patrick was forced to flee, and this group would later become the Machine Cult. In 1981, to fight back against the machine cult, the scientist adopted the name of Patrick and repurposed the time machine into an infinite energy device, founding a wealthy empire. However, the machine cult had also discovered that the original time machine could swap souls. By switching bodies, they prolonged their lives and infiltrated various industries. The greedy cult leader wanted to combine Patrick's machine with the one in his possession, and their conflict escalated, eventually leading to violence. In 1995, after a fierce battle, Patrick met the love of his life, settled down, and had a daughter. But the machine cult wasn't done with him. In 2001, they murdered his wife, enraging Patrick to the point where he created the steel-clad suit and prepared to travel to the future to settle all scores. Back in the present, Todd and Dirk tried to convince Patrick not to act recklessly, but his mind was made up. He was determined to end the feud himself. After he left, Todd and Dirk resumed discussing the case, realizing that the Patrick of their current timeline was still alive. They decided they could go to the hotel and prevent the tragedy from ever happening. Meanwhile, Gordon had stolen the soul-swapping device, and the remaining core members of the machine cult had all been killed. His plan was to use Lydia to force Patrick to hand over the infinite energy machine, and with that, the world would be his. As an extra safeguard, his secret weapon was the black cat housing the shark's soul. Elsewhere, Todd spotted some animal masks on the side of the road. He handed the gorilla mask to Dirk and put on a giraffe mask himself to conceal their identities. The two then hijacked a car and sped off towards the hotel. When they arrived at the hotel's back entrance, Todd suddenly noticed the winning lottery ticket in the car and had an epiphany. Dirk urged him to hurry, and they initially planned to take the staff elevator. However, they saw that Gordon had already taken it, so they switched to the freight elevator instead. Unfortunately, they encountered the steel-clad Patrick also entering the freight elevator, leaving them no choice but to take the stairs. Meanwhile, in the penthouse, the Patrick from the current timeline had already met with Gordon. He immediately noticed something was wrong with his daughter's soul. Gordon didn't bother hiding it and directly demanded the machine, but Patrick was unmoved. He called Dirk from the current timeline, telling him to hurry to the hotel. The very next moment, the steel-clad Patrick arrived, confronting the machine cult. The two versions of Patrick stared at each other, leaving Gordon momentarily dumbfounded. Just as tensions reached their peak, Todd and Dirk finally arrived, but it was too late. The steel-clad Patrick fired a shot, hitting one of the machine cult members. The black cat was thrown into the fray, and the shark soul wreaked havoc, killing indiscriminately. Patrick, seemingly resigned to his fate, remained still, only moving to save his daughter's body at the last moment, sacrificing himself as the shark killed him. After the shark's soul returned to the black cat, Todd and Dirk hurriedly took the steel-clad Patrick and fled. Gordon, shaken but still alive, quickly escaped with his men, informing them of everything that had transpired at the hotel and deciding to retreat to his base to regroup. All of this was overheard by the corgi, who still had Lydia's soul inside. Meanwhile, Dirk encountered his past self on the 18th floor. He quickly gave him Todd's home address and told him to find the black cat in the room. Todd suddenly realized that Dirk had known a lot of the clues all along, but had been keeping them from him, which led to a heated argument between the two. Mid-argument, Todd remembered something and turned to see his past self from a week ago. Realizing the gravity of the situation, he quickly pulled Dirk away. After their escape, Patrick threw all of his equipment into the river. Dirk tried to explain the events of their investigation, insisting that all the trouble had stemmed from Patrick. However, Todd believed there was still time to save Lydia. Patrick reminded them that the first time the machine had traveled through time, it had a note from Dirk on it, meaning the two now had to send the time machine back to Patrick in 1886. After sorting out the timeline, Patrick finally admitted to his mistakes and pleaded with them to save his daughter. He, on the other hand, would return to 2001 to spend his remaining time with his family and peacefully accept his fate. The two followed fate's path and returned to Gordon's base, activating the machine once again. This time, they planned to return to 5 minutes before their previous time jump. At that moment, the bodyguard was locked in the trunk, trying to shoot open the lock. The noise distracted Gordon and his men, giving Todd and Dirk from the past the chance to escape. Once the bodyguard freed herself from the trunk, she swiftly dealt with the fake FBI agent. The officer also arrived with the corgi, giving Gordon a beating, though he still managed to escape in the end. Meanwhile, the newly arrived Todd and Dirk were immediately ambushed and wounded by 2 machine cult members. Elsewhere, the leader of the punk gang sensed an unusual energy flow and decided to investigate. The hit woman, encouraged by the keyboard warrior, continued her pursuit of Dirk. The police chased Gordon into the back room, firing several shots, but accidentally hitting the device. Gordon and his men made a frantic escape, with the bodyguard arriving just in time to pursue them. However, the officer, still not trusting her, forced her to drop her weapon, leading to all 3 of them being detained by the police. Luckily, the bodyguard managed to use a wire hidden in her bra to pick the lock and successfully ambush the officer, taking his gun. She then listened patiently as Todd explained the truth and eventually decided to join the group. They all hurried to the Patrick family's lab, knowing that the machine cult would make one last attempt to steal the machine. Sure enough, the machine cult had arrived, only to clash with the punk gang, and a fierce fight broke out between the two groups. Inside the lab, Todd struggled for a while but finally managed to fix the machine. The officer quickly turned the crank, and with a flash of light, Lydia's and the corgi's souls were restored to their rightful bodies. However, Gordon and his men had already sneaked in, forcing the officer and the bodyguard to rush outside and confront them. After a chaotic battle, Gordon found himself facing off against the bodyguard, who was holding the corgi. In a split second, she threw the corgi at Gordon, and as he instinctively reached out to catch it, she shot him in the head, ending his life of crime. Lydia, back to her original self, was so furious that she wanted to destroy the machine, but Todd and Dirk managed to talk her out of it. The machine hadn't yet been transformed into a time machine, and just as two more machine cult members barged in, Todd tried to fight them but was no match. In desperation, Lydia lifted the machine and threatened the machine cult members to back off. At that moment, the hit woman arrived and swiftly killed the two gang members. She then aimed her final bullet at Dirk, intending to kill him. However, the keyboard warrior suddenly became excited upon seeing the machine, recognizing it as the device the machine cult had hired him to modify years ago. He quickly finished repairing it, while Dirk hurriedly wrote down a note. Just as they were about to finish, the hit woman pointed her gun at Dirk again, but in a sudden turn, she shot a machine cult member who had been about to ambush them, using her last bullet. Seeing it as a sign from fate, the hitman let go of her obsession and left with the keyboard warrior for an intimate life. Finally, the group successfully sent the machine back to 1886, completing the story's time loop. The next day, Todd was rudely awakened by his sister pouring a glass of water over him. The machine cult had been completely wiped out the night before, and she had brought him home. Meanwhile, Dirk had been taken to the hospital by the officer. Seeing that her brother was safe, Todd's sister decided to resume her travels with the punk gang, planning to tour the world. After this journey, the keyboard warrior also chose to stay with the hit woman, and the two of them decided to continue their mission of bringing justice to the wicked. For safety, the bodyguard escorted Lydia out of the country. Not long after, Dirk was discharged from the hospital, and Todd came to pick him up. The two reconciled, mending their friendship. They then teamed up with the bodyguard, planning to start an all-purpose detective agency, specializing in solving unresolved supernatural cases. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.